Hi, everyone. Like Victor said, my name is Elena. I'm an Associate Director of Admissions here at WashU, and also a proud alum of WashU. I graduated in 2016, but really happy to be here to talk more about kind of the road to college and understanding highly selective admissions and the holistic admissions process, which is what we use to build a class here at WashU. And while what I'm talking about does talk a lot about WashU, right, the process that we use, you can think about this for any other selective or highly selective institutions you may be interested in applying for. So we hope that this is helpful, not only if you decide to apply to WashU, but also other colleges or universities as well. And there's kind of three things that we'll cover tonight before we get into that live Q&A session. The first is just kind of setting definitions, right? What does it mean for an institution, a college or a university to be highly selective, right? What does that mean? The second thing is, what does the actual application review process look like at a school like WashU that is highly selective? And then finally, what is your role in this process, right? As the applicant, as a student that's looking to apply and hopefully matriculate right into one of these colleges or universities, how can you make this process easier, more manageable, more exciting for yourself? How can you be more prepared to be a strong and competitive applicant at a highly selective institution? And like Victor said, if you have questions, please feel free to use that Q&A box here in Zoom, because we'll also have time at the end for live Q&A about any of these topics. So to start, let's talk about what it means for a college or university to be highly selective. There are around 5,000 colleges and universities in the United States. So there are a lot of colleges you could choose to apply to and ultimately attend. On average, the acceptance rate at a four-year college or university is about 66%. So that means for that every 100 students that apply, 66 of them are admitted to that college or university. Therefore, most colleges and universities in the US are not selective or highly selective, right? The majority of colleges are not this selective kind of process that we'll talk about tonight. In fact, only about 50 universities have this classification. And I just like to set that up as kind of a reminder. There are many options for you, and highly selective admissions it is kind of one process, but it's not the only process. And so we'll talk a little bit about different kind of rounds and applications, and we'll talk about some of the other things that schools may use that may be not highly selective. For schools that are highly selective, right, that is kind of classifying schools that have an admit rate of about 30% or less, so that admit about a third of their applicants. And that's kind of where WashU sits, right? Last year for our class of 2025, we received over 33,000 applications. Our incoming class of students is about 2,000 students, and we admitted about 4,300 students. So you kind of do that math, right? Our admit rate last year was about 13%. So that puts us kind of within that 30% or lower, right? And so that just kind of means that we are highly selective because we have far more applications, right, than space in the class. And I just also, before we transition into a little bit about the application process, right? The application process at highly selective institutions is not meant to be a negative experience, right? It's the reality, again, of kind of beds on campus, space in classrooms, compared to the number of students that we admit. And we see in our admissions process so many talented, qualified, fantastic students that could really do well here on our campus. And just the reality is that we can't admit all of those students because they wouldn't fit in our classroom spaces, right? They wouldn't fit in our dorms. And the experience that we have on our campus of having small classes, of having guaranteed housing in your first year, right? Those are things kind of built on having a particular class size. And so it's just always a nice thing to remember, right? That there are so many great students that we could admit, right? That are tuning into the webinar, right? That are applying to WashU. And so we want to talk a little bit now about kind of the application process, right? So you can think about where in the application process maybe you can stand out, ways you could strengthen your application, and just to talk about how colleges and universities consider students throughout this process. Before that, I do just want to kind of do some more definitions, right, about different application types that you can use. And I'll be sure to highlight things that highly selective institutions may use throughout this application types, but also application rounds and plans. The first thing up here, right, is going to be the common application. And that is one that you may be familiar with, appropriately named, right? All applicants that use the common app will fill out kind of a general profile, fill out information on demographics, family history, you know, where you go to school. You'll have a section if you want to include your standardized test scores, activities lists, right, writing sections, things like that. And then once you fill out all that information and submit that to your schools, that information goes to all the schools on your list. So it makes it easy if any of your schools are on the Common App. Coalition application, very similar process. It's slightly newer and kind of when it was founded. It was built in 2015 and has really expanded. About 135 schools use the coalition application. And they really kind of share a mission to promote college access, affordability, and success. Very similar and kind of setup, right? Has general sections for you to fill out, and then we'll go to any schools on your list that are using the coalition application. WashU, we offer both of these applications to students, so one is not better than the other, right? They're just two versions of kind of this general application that students can use. The other option for students could be the QuestBridge college application. QuestBridge is a national college scholarship for students that are from lower limited income backgrounds and kind of limited resourced backgrounds that are looking to apply to the QuestBridge College Partners, which at this point is about 45 selective and highly selective institutions here in the US. If you're interested in that QuestBridge process, if you feel like those kind of students may seem like you, right? You may be a limited resource student from a first generation college background. I encourage you to look up QuestBridge and see if that could be a potential application for you to use and process for you to go through. QuestBridge is also a process that WashU uses, right? So here at WashU, the Common, the Coalition, the QuestBridge application are the applications that we would consider. The other type of application that you could apply to or use to apply to different universities is an institution specific. And so unlike these other ones that will go to multiple schools, if you're applying to a school that uses an institution specific application, that will only go to that one school, right? So they may ask specific questions about their institution on that application or just have kind of general information as well about you and kind of your background, but it only is kind of good for that one school. And just to note here, QuestBridge and Coalition and Common application, there may be sections on those applications that you can provide additional information just to one school. So things like supplemental sections or supplemental essays that you may hear about. But again, just kind of different options for students when it comes to applying to college. I would say, depending on your school, it's nice to kind of pick one if you can, depending on what the schools that you're applying to, right? So seeing if all your schools take the Common application, you could use just the Common application, but some schools will ask for different things. So just nice to do your research to figure out kind of which application may be right for you kind of in this process, or if you may need to do more than one, right? Maybe you need to do the Common application and then one or two institution specific applications. The next thing to consider when you're thinking about applying to college universities is which round you want to submit your application to. And this has a variety of options. I would say for highly selective institutions, most common is going to be early decision, early action, or regular decision. So early decision, if you're unfamiliar, is a binding round. So when you apply in an early decision round, you apply earlier, most likely, than kind of the regular decision application. You also expect to hear back a little bit earlier. So the process kind of sets you up a little bit earlier. It's binding in the sense that you have to know that that school is your first choice school. If you're admitted in a binding ED plan, you would withdraw your applications from all other schools and enroll at that institution. So a great option for students that are really set on one institution. They feel really confident in that decision, right? They've done some of the research, they've talked to their families about it, and they feel confident going through an early decision round. The other option of an early plan is early action. And this is non-binding, but often follows a similar earlier path. So you may apply earlier, hear earlier, but is non-binding. So you'll have until that kind of May 1st, early May deadline to make your final decision of whether or not you want to attend that college or university. Regular decision, which is not up here, but is kind of the other option that a lot of highly selective institutions use, is non-binding. It's kind of one deadline, right, that you'll apply to, and then applicants will all hear back on the same day later in the spring, most often. Rolling admission is a little bit different. That means that the institution may release your admissions decision anywhere from like 2 days to 6 weeks after you apply, kind of once they have your full application. So the admissions officer are kind of continually admitting students throughout the year. So just a little bit of a different process there. One thing to note about rolling decisions, if any of the schools you're applying to have that rolling process, if they have scholarships, sometimes those do have a set deadline. And so you want to make sure that you're doing that research into any sort of particular merit scholarships or financial aid deadlines that may come at a different point than that kind of rolling process. And then finally, which we won't spend a ton of time on today, is this open admissions, right? Most, I would say, if not all, highly selective institutions do not have this open admissions plan, right? This is more common at like a community college in your area, or other kind of institutions like that, where the only kind of requirement is a high school diploma, right? So kind of welcoming students that want to come and be part of that institution. There's not kind of this entire kind of application process of different pieces and everything like that. So another kind of option for students, again, less likely at a highly selective institution. Here at WashU, for example, we offer 2 early decision plans, different timelines, but the same sort of binding agreement, and then 1 regular decision plan that students can choose from. So just one example of kind of what those options could look like. Most highly selective institutions will utilize what we call holistic admissions in this process. And this is kind of counter to more of that formulaic admissions that could exist where, a certain GPA or a certain test score on an ACT or an SAT would automatically, kind of ensure enrollment at the university. In highly selective admissions, because of that kind of nature of having so many applications, right, and kind of so few spots, we're going to use this holistic admissions, which evaluates all parts of the application within context of your background, your experience, your school, your country, right, where you're living, to understand how you're going to contribute and add to the life of the university. And we look at all of these things to help build a really well-rounded class of students here on campus. So going through kind of what you will submit and then what we consider, your high school transcript, right? That academic piece is going to be important to colleges, looking to see that you are challenging yourself, right? That you're taking rigorous courses that are offered to you. They'll take a look at that rigor of the courses, right? What is offered at your high school? Are there honors courses, AP, IB, dual enrollment courses, right? Specialized, maybe A levels, whatever kind of program your school uses. They'll also use your activities that you do, right? So any extracurricular sports or hobbies or clubs, jobs that you have, right? Any way you're spending your time to understand kind of your life outside of school. If the schools are requiring or have test optional policies, your standardized test scores will add to that, right? Demonstrated interest or interviews may play into it. Demonstrated interest is a way that schools may factor in things like attending a campus visit, attending a webinar like this, sending an email, right, into kind of their understanding of you as an applicant, or other things like interviews, or we have like an optional video students can submit. And these may just be other ways for you to kind of share your story, right, or kind of share your interest in the university. The last 2 things up here, right, those essays or personal statements that you write are considered to help us get a better sense of you and your story, what matters to you, right? What's something that you like or don't like, or, a particular experience that you want to share with us. Some schools may have multiple essays. Some will just require kind of 1. But again, those are all reviewed to understand you kind of outside of the academic review. And then finally, schools will also require letters of recommendation. Depending on the school, it may vary the number that are required or the type, but these are ways for a teacher or a counselor or other person in your community to advocate for you, right? To say, okay, this person took chemistry with me and I want to talk about kind of all the great ways that they were a chemistry student or how involved they were in this club or whatever it is, right? So all of these things are used to better understand you as a student, but also a person in your community, right? What do you like to do for fun? How have you added, do you have responsibilities to your family? How have you made an impact, right? We're looking at kind of the full picture of you to help us understand how you're going to contribute and add to our campus community. I think something to know, and what may be perhaps challenging or maybe frustrating about this process, is there is no magic formula for holistic review. So quite often we hear from students, what is the weighting of my test score, or will it be better or worse for me to have X, Y, or Z? And the reality is there isn't one specific thing a student could do or should do to automatically be admitted to a school that is highly selective using holistic admissions, right? It is truly the full picture of you. And some students may have, fewer activities, but, more challenging rigor. Some may have less rigor offered to them at their high school. They've gotten really involved in a school activity or extracurricular. And, one is not better than the other. They're completely different situations. And we get to use holistic review to understand each student in context and advocate for you in our process, right? But I think it really is kind of this balancing act, I think, between, who you are and what you're bringing to the table, and also, what matters to the institution. So again, just kind of a recap of holistic review, right? Every component of the application is considered. So all those things I just mentioned, right, are part of the admissions review. If you're somebody that also has to submit additional materials, some schools may have additional things, right, that they're asking for, that is considered in the process. Second thing, right, admissions offices are creating the best community possible, kind of one student at a time. So we're looking through each individual student in your application to understand you better, to think about, okay, how does this person fit into our community? How will they change our community? How are they going to bring their background, their experiences, all of the great things about you, right, to our community? And again, we're building a well-rounded community, which I think is something that can be tricky to think about, right? Is that it's not just necessarily taking all the students that have perfect ACT scores, right? We don't do that because we're looking for students that are bringing different things to our campus community. So that's where that holistic review comes through. And again, looking for students that have different backgrounds, different experiences. That's something that's really valuable to a college experience, is being able to talk to people that are different from you, right? And they're sharing their opinions and their perspectives. That adds so much. That's such an important part of the college experience, at least for us. That we are actively looking in the application process, again, not to admit a class of, all biology majors with a certain test score, or all English majors with a certain activity, but instead thinking about how each individual student is adding to this. And then it really comes down to that fit, right? Thinking about your academic review, your qualitative pieces, your community fit, and kind of how those things add and create this picture of you. And how those things also may overlap with kind of that institution, right? You may be a great fit for one institution and a less good fit for a different one. That's not a bad thing. That's just the fact that there are 5,000 universities in the US, and certain schools are a better fit or a better match for you. Or they may be a place that you're going to grow more, right? Or maybe you're looking to be a big fish in a little pond. Maybe you're looking to be a little fish in a big pond, right? There may be differences to the structure of the universities or things that will also impact on kind of how you fit or how you ultimately contribute at these places. The other thing that is important to know about holistic admissions and highly selective admissions, right, that there's also factors in play that the university or the institution is setting to say these are areas of growth for the university, or these are priorities that the university has. And those can vastly differ from university to university, but do give you a sense of maybe, where areas, again, the university is looking to expand. So maybe, a university wants to have more women in STEM, and that's going to be a priority of their kind of admissions review. That's going to be a priority for them in looking through how to build a strong class. Maybe they want to expand the number of first generation to college students on campus. Maybe that's a priority. That's something for us here at WashU. Our chancellor has been very vocal about wanting to make WashU the top destination for first generation to college students. And so that's something that we're looking through when we're looking for students and thinking about activities and involvements on campus for our students. How can we be an institution that does that, right? And therefore supporting students in this process that may be coming from those backgrounds. And that's just one of many different priorities that WashU has, but you can find information on different kind of institutional priorities on the university's websites. They're pretty clearly stated, like what the value or mission of that institution is. And if you read in the articles about the school, right, things they've come out to do or change about the institution can give you a good sense of some areas that university may be focusing on in that admission cycle. The other thing to know is that these things can change, right? Just like you change and I change, right? Things change over time. And so one priority this year may not be the same priority in 10 years or in 2 years. And it may not be the same priority 15 years ago. And so it's important to do your research or just understand that the universities you're applying to may be different in who they're looking for or what they're looking at now than they did 30 years ago, right? So if you have an aunt or an uncle or a coach telling you one thing about, oh, when I was applying to university, right, X, they wanted more students that were athletes or whatever it is, right? That may have changed by now. And so while it's really helpful to get advice, to talk to people that have gone through this process, always kind of rely on the most updated information, right, from schools and universities about some of these things because they do change. So a little bit more about kind of that magic formula that doesn't exist, right? This idea of like, how do I become a really, really strong candidate for a school that happens to have highly selective admissions? It's difficult to predict, right? How, your chances, we get asked a lot, what are my chances, right? I have a a certain GPA and a certain test score, and I'm involved in X number of sports, do I have a really high chance of being admitted? And it's really hard for us to give kind of a student a great sense of that, because again, we have so many students that are applying. It changes every year. For you as a student, right, you should be, and we'll talk about this in a second, but focusing on your high school experience, right? Focusing on your academic experiences, those community fit pieces, right? Thinking about how you can grow as a person and find things that you love to do. Those sorts of things make students stand out in this process. But admissions decisions at highly selective institutions are hard to predict because things change all the time and because the group of students changes over time. They're based on institutional priorities and goals that the institutions have, right? For one. Two, the evaluation is both objective, but also subjective, right? We have a committee of admissions officers. There are about 20 of us that are reviewing applications and advocating for students, and getting to know you and your family and your school in this process, and really advocating for our students. And there are objective pieces, right? We look at kind of your transcript that has numerical values, right? Or grades that help us understand you kind of numerically. But there are a lot of pieces that are less kind of strict, right? Of course, activities, there's no sort of magical number of activities we're looking for or no magic type of activity. And so those things can be more subjective, right? How has a student made an impact? That can look very, very different for every single student. And so that process can be both objective and subjective. And finally, just a reminder that every year is different. A student that may be very competitive one year may be just as competitive the next year, or they may not be as competitive next year, just depending on the pool, depending on the year. And I think the current pandemic, right, what we're living through right now is a great example of how things change as the world changes. 3 years ago, if we were applying to WashU, standardized testing and ACT and SAT required, right, a required part of our process. Through this pandemic, right, we've reevaluated the need for standardized testing, and we're now test optional for the next 2 years after this current cycle, which means that students that are applying the next 2 years can decide whether or not they would like to submit their test scores. If you submit them, we consider them, right? We use them in the process to advocate for you, to understand you from one other academic context. But for our students that choose not to submit testing, that's just not part of their academic review, right? But test optional, or there may be schools that are test free, so they don't even consider testing even if you've submitted it, right? And there may be schools that go back and require testing, but that's one thing that's kind of changed, right, as the world has changed. And so this process changes every year with what may be required or how students are considered or reviewed, or again, what kind of it is the priority or value of that institution this year. So I want to talk now less about kind of the process from an institution perspective, right? And more how you as a student going through this process, thinking about colleges, doing your research, eventually applying to colleges and universities, how can you put your best foot forward? What can you be doing now? But also just kind of general tips, I think, that will help this process be easier for you and potentially more fun. The first is to kind of take the lead and have fun with the process, which can be hard. I know it's kind of sometimes a stressful process to think about, I'm going to live somewhere for the next 4 years of my life. Where's that going to be? Some people want to go really far away from home. Some people want to stay close. People want a big city, small town, right? There's lots of options for students. But I think if you see this as an opportunity for you to be somewhere for the next 4 years, and they're really formative years, right? Areas where you can grow and learn so much, and maybe try classes that you've never taken in high school, or join a club or a research lab that you never thought you would do, right? It's a really exciting time in your life to think about that next step. So I encourage you to think about it that way, right? Not to focus on kind of the negative parts of it or the potentially competitive or challenging parts of it, but to instead focus on those positives. And I also really encourage you to take the lead. Some of you may have parents or guardians or family members that are helping you along this process, right? They're meeting with you or chatting with you, or maybe you have older siblings or friends that have gone through this process. And some of you may have college counselors you're working with, right, that are also helping guide and support you. Those people are great. I'm not saying ignore them fully, right? Bring them along your process. But in the end, right, you are in the driver's seat. It is your college, your university for the next 4 years. And so do some time as well in this process, now as you're a sophomore or junior in high school, thinking about what matters to you about that next 4 years, right? Think about what you like now about your high school. Do you like if it's big or small classes in a big city, right? What do you like about your current community? Are those things you want to bring with you to college? Are those things you want to change? And the same things about yourself too. What are some areas in your own life or personal qualities that you want to definitely continue, right? If you're an outgoing person, maybe you want to be somewhere with a lot of different people where you can meet different people. Or maybe you're someone that's a little bit quieter or shy, but you're seeing college as an opportunity to really spread your wings and grow, right? There's lots of ways that you can think about this process. But again, reflect for yourself on what matters to you in this process and help those things guide you alongside the other conversations you're having with kind of those advisors that you're working with. The second thing, and I know that this seems slightly counterintuitive because we're talking about college, but focus on your high school experience. Like I mentioned, we get asked all the time, how do I stand out in this process? And truly the students that kind of rise above a good application into a great application are the students that have really found ways in their current everyday lives, right, to make an impact in some way, to take initiative, to find an interest or a passion, right? You don't have to do all those things, right? But think about ways in your current life that you can enjoy the classes that you're in, that you can enjoy the clubs that you're a part of, that you can help out your family or community. Those moments where you're kind of making that larger impact instead of just going through the motions are really helpful in helping us think about, okay, the student really is somebody that's going to come to the college and really kind of make it their all, right? Become a really great member of this campus community. But that means focusing on your courses now, right? Focus on your courses for all 4 years of high school, even senior year, right? Kind of focus on taking those challenging courses and taking classes that are going to kind of push you, challenge you, and may help you explore the area you're going into. So if you're thinking now, I'm interested in engineering, think about taking that physics class, that calculus class, right? If you're interested in business, think about taking that calculus class. If you're interested in architecture, like we have here, think about taking some art classes, right? Like there's areas where you can continue to push yourself and grow that'll help you learn, okay, maybe I do want to go into political science. Maybe I do want to go into engineering, which can be helpful. The next thing is to do your research in the universities and colleges, right? And ask questions. Our job as admissions officers is to answer your questions alongside other things, right? But one of our main parts of our job is to hear your questions and to help you understand the academic communities and the social communities that are here on our campuses. You'll feel much more confident when you're applying to colleges and universities and they're asking you in an interview or in a supplemental essay to talk about why you're interested in that particular program or school, or what about college excites you or interests you, right? Because you've done some research, you've thought about what interests and excites you, and you know kind of why that college or university is interesting you. That is something that I think can really set you apart in this process if you've done your clear research. And then that last thing right up here is thinking about kind of fit. Once again, there are 5,000 colleges and universities in the United States. The 50 schools that are deemed highly selective could be a great fit for you. They may not be a great fit for you. There may be one that's a great fit for you. There may be 10, right? We're all very different. And so it's important to think about that fit for yourself, right? Do you want to be in a certain type of environment? Are you somebody that really values hands-on learning, right? Not all colleges and universities within those 50 schools, within 5,000 schools, have everything you're looking for, or maybe the best place for you throughout your college experience. So I encourage you to think more about kind of what are those things that you're hoping to get out of your college experience, where you're hoping to be, what are some important parts of the college experience that you want to do? Is it study abroad? Is it research? Is it clubs, right? Those would be ways for you to think about what universities you should apply to, as opposed to getting caught up in kind of the rankings or the numbers or the highly selective nature of colleges, right? Think about that fit. And then these are kind of steps, more kind of, I guess, pragmatic steps that you'll take when you start to apply or kind of put colleges on your list, right? The first is to have that conversation with that support system. So your families, guardians, right, parents, even counselors, about what you're hoping to get out of this experience, this application process, but also obviously your college experience. It can be really nice to have that conversation a little bit earlier than you think, because there's a chance that your family and you have a different expectation or understanding about what you're hoping to learn in college or where you're hoping to go. And it's better to have those conversations earlier than to start applying to colleges and then realize that you have very different understandings of where you think you see yourself, right? And so it's nice to have that conversation with your parents or families about the college process. If you are somebody that is coming from a family where maybe nobody in your family has gone to college, right? It can also be a nice chance to just touch base with them about what this process will look like. And I encourage you to bring in maybe a college counselor if you want to, or somebody like that, if you work with a college-bound organization, so they can also help you go through this process and have that conversation about what this process will look like and what this time in your life will look like. Because not everybody has had that experience going in. And maybe for somebody that's coming in that has a lot of experience, both parents maybe graduated from college, or you have an older sibling that went to college. They may have done it one way. You may want to do it differently. And so it's nice to kind of get on the same page, or at least kind of air out those thoughts and feelings as you're starting this process. Second thing, very logistical, right, is figure out the required materials, application fees, deadlines, right? Make a list of those things as you're learning about schools, because it'll help you plan down the road. Most of the things are on university websites, so they're not hidden, right? We want you to know how much it's going to cost to apply to universities, or if we offer fee waivers, right? When the deadlines are, right? When you have to apply by, and all of that stuff. But once you have kind of a running list or an Excel sheet, right, of all this stuff, it'll start to feel a little bit more manageable. The next thing for my students, that if you're currently like a junior in high school, right, if you're in your third year, you can start thinking about potential letter for recommendation. Like I mentioned, that's one way that kind of we get to hear from particular counselors or teachers or coaches or bosses or things like that. You can have somebody from your junior year write you a letter. So start to think about, is there anyone from your junior year or maybe even your sophomore year that you think would be a great recommender? And you can start asking that person in your junior spring if you want. You know, would you mind writing me a recommendation when I apply to college next year? It gives them plenty of time to think about it, right? Or to also spend some time over the summer when maybe they're a little bit less busy to write those letters of recommendation. You, of course, can ask a senior year teacher, right? But you want to think about being thoughtful of their time, right? Maybe ask them earlier than kind of, January. That's when the deadline is, right? To give them time. So just start to think about, who my recommenders could be. And then finally, do your research on scholarships and financial aid that are offered by that college or university, right? Or other outside scholarships as well. And a lot of students end up with a combination of not only kind of university aid or scholarships, but also maybe your local community, your local Rotary Club, your local PTSO, right? Or any sort of other organization may offer scholarships and things like that. And that's another great conversation to have with your parents, guardians, or anyone else that may be helping fund your college experience or not funding your college experience. I think it's really important to have that conversation to figure out, okay, what funds may be available for me for college. And if not, great. Then you need to make sure that you're applying to schools that will offer, full funded experiences, or you're applying to outside scholarships, or there's a plan for you to take out loans, right? Whatever it may be, it's different for every family. But it's really important to have those conversations earlier rather than later about kind of what that expectation or plan may be for you, or how you're financing education, right? And we all have financial aid offices that are also happy to talk to families about this process and host financial aid webinars like we're doing next week on financing and education, right? So maybe bring your families along for that one to learn a little bit more about what financial aid or scholarships may look like. That was a lot of information, right? But in the end, it is really kind of you in the driver's seat, right? Thinking about this process. And we'll move to questions. I know Victor is eager with questions, but just a reminder that you are truly in the driver's seat of this, right? You get the opportunity to think about your potential home in college, where you want to be, what you want to do, and that you may spend time on your application. You should spend time in your application because there's so many factors and parts of it that go into it that help us get to know you in this process as well. All right. With that, we're going to move on to Q&A. I see that there are questions coming into Q&A. If you have more questions, keep putting those in there, but we will now transition into kind of a live Q&A.
Great. Well, wonderful job, Elena. Thank you for presenting, and happy to toss some questions to you over the next 10 minutes. We're getting a lot of questions about testing. And recognizing kind of the changed landscape of schools, including WashU, being test optional. We have extended that policy for a couple of years, as Elena mentioned. How important are SAT or ACT scores if you have a good GPA, letters of recommendation, or involvement? And can you comment on how students might want to approach the decision of whether or not to send their scores in a test optional environment?
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. Great questions. And we know that that's on everybody's mind right now, right? Especially as kind of testing has changed over time. The reality is testing, if submitted, is one piece of the academic portion. I would say for WashU and probably for most schools, it will never supersede that of your high school transcript, right? So we're going to look first and foremost at the classes that you've taken, how you're doing in those courses, right? Everything like that first. That's the most important because that is what you've been doing for the past 4 years, right? It's what you do on a daily basis. A standardized test score is what you do on one Saturday once, right? Maybe twice, if you take it twice, but it's a little bit different, right? If you choose to submit your standardized test scores to WashU or a school that's test optional like us, it will be considered in the review. And so our recommendation always is for students to take standardized testing and you feel like it is a strong indicator of your academic performance, right? You feel proud of it. You're like, this is great. You can send it, right? It's definitely going to be something that we're considering in that process. If you take your tests and you're like, I think my GPA or my transcript reads stronger, that's a better indicator of my academic performance, right? You can choose to not submit your test scores. That is completely in your wheelhouse, right? You can decide my academic transcript is my strength. I want that to be kind of what stands alone. We, in our process, don't second guess or question why a student may not have a test score. We don't automatically assume that it's a low test score or lower than anything, right? Because we also know that not all students have had access to testing in the same way these past couple of years. And so it's kind of an access question as well for us, right? So I think ultimately, a general rule of thumb that I've heard from other schools as well, so not just us, is consider what the school's kind of middle 50% of test scores may be, kind of that middle range of their class of students. And if your scores are within that or kind of above that, right, you can see your score as another kind of strong indicator that you may be a competitive applicant for that school. If your scores are lower than that, still may be a great test score and something that we will consider and admit students with test scores lower than that, because the reality, right, about a middle 50% score is that a fourth of our class had lower than that range. So it's not automatically like I shouldn't submit it, right? But I think that can be a general piece of advice for students that are kind of on the fence, right? Each school, it's different as well, right? Our middle 50% on an ACT, SAT may be very different from a different school you're looking at. So you may choose to submit test scores to one school, but not to another. Again, right, one part of the academic review, if submitted, your academic transcript is most important.
So speaking of transcript, another question that we got is, would highly selective schools rather students take more rigorous coursework like honors, AP, IB coursework, even if that might lower a student's GPA? And a related question is, how about dual credit coursework? Can you talk about kind of the calculus there with, you likely will not get credit for dual credit. That's just the reality at a place like WashU. But should students still pursue that?
Sure. So the tricky answer about kind of the first part of that question is kind of, should I take harder classes and get maybe slightly lower grades, or easier classes and get slightly higher grades, right? For somewhere like WashU, right, we're hoping that you're able to take some more rigorous courses and get good grades, right? And that's that tricky nuance of the process, right? But we always want you doing that in a healthy balance for you, right? We never expect that students are taking all of the APs that exist at your high school, right? Or every single rigorous course. Some of those may not be something that interests or excites you. There's a balance to be struck between academic life and your mental health and your social life. And that's really important to us. It's going to be up to you if you want to. We like to see that students are challenging themselves. So I think probably taking that challenging course, but ultimately, right, we're hoping to see students that are challenging themselves and doing well in those courses, right? Those students are going to end up being the most competitive. And that really is because our classroom environment on campus is one that's really challenging, right? That's the level that our faculty are kind of expecting and teaching at. And hopefully you're excited to be in that sort of kind of intellectually stimulating and challenging environment. And so we're looking for students that have done that in high school, right? And are well prepped and kind of ready for that experience here. Second part of that question about dual enrollment, right? So dual enrollment courses, you're often taking, right, either through your high school or at a local college or university, and are a great way for you to start taking some college coursework. Here at WashU, if those courses are counting for your high school diploma, they don't double count for you here. And so that is kind of that reality that Victor was saying, right? For you as a student, they may be a great option because other colleges and universities around the US may take them for direct credit. And so you may be able to place higher into a certain class or get out of a general education requirement or whatever it is. At WashU, and I know this is similar for some of our peer schools as well, schools that are like WashU, you may not get credit for that in the same way that you would. So you're still going to have to come in and take chemistry again once you get here, even if you took chemistry at kind of your local community college in high school. It's a balance, I think, when students say, should I take dual enrollment courses, right? It's up to you ultimately. If they are challenging courses that are challenging you, right, and helping you understand the college experience, that could be a great thing for you to take. I think it's also good to know that we won't take that credit. Doesn't mean you shouldn't take them because they may challenge and excite you, right? But it'll depend on you in this process and what you're hoping to get out of that. If you're hoping to get dual enrollment credit and graduate early from college because you're coming in with 60 credits, a school like WashU may not be a good fit for you because we're not going to offer that to you. So just nice to know as you're doing that, if you're somebody that's considering dual enrollment, just knowing that some colleges won't accept it is nice to know. Doesn't mean you need to not take it or take it, right? It's just something to weigh when you're considering what types of classes that you want to take in high school.
Wonderful. All right, so thinking about the kind of the qualitative pieces of that, like the non-academic side of the application, can you talk about extracurricular activities? Should they be more varied? Should they be more focused? Should they be related to what you want to study? What is even considered an extracurricular activity that we would like to know in the process?
Yeah, so anything that you list on your activities list can truly be anything you're doing outside of eating, sleeping, breathing, and going to school. Like quite honestly, any club, sport, team you're involved in through your school, through a larger organization, but also part-time jobs or family responsibilities, right? Maybe you take care of a younger sibling after school or an elderly grandparent or something like that, right? You have other sort of responsibilities. Or we see too students with like very serious hobbies, like maybe you practice piano and play piano every day, but it's not like a formal club, right? You're not like in a piano club or anything like that. Maybe you don't even take formal lessons, right? But that's something that you're doing and spending your time. All of those things would be considered. The common application offers up to 10 spaces for you. We don't expect that students fill all 10 spaces. Some students do. Some also include a resume with more. Some list 3, and that's also awesome, right? Or 1 or 2, whatever it is. There is not kind of a magic number of kind of how many activities you should do. And there truly isn't like a magic type as well, right? We're looking for you to be involved in things that you're excited about or that are challenging you, that may be helping you understand your future plans, right? So maybe you're somebody that's thinking about pre-medicine. If your school has a pre-medical society or hosts a club, right? Or other ways for you to get involved, maybe you're doing that because that's helping you down that path. You don't need to have those things to be a competitive applicant at all, right? So we have students every year that apply to WashU that want to do political science, but nothing in their activities list. They're not part of a political science club or anything like that, because we also know that you may change your mind in college, right? We don't enroll you directly into a major, right? We don't expect you to know exactly what you want to do. And so we know that your activities often reflect someone that's, 14 to 18 and learning and growing and changing as you go through high school. So it really will depend on you as a student, kind of what those activities look like and kind of if they're very varied, right? Maybe you're somebody that really likes to take on different courses or different clubs every year, right? One year you're in, one affinity group, the next year you want to join another one to learn more, right? Maybe that's who you are. Or maybe you're really dedicated to Model UN and that is what you do. And you rise to leadership there and you go to conference, right? Like maybe that's who you are. It's more about you and kind of what story you're telling and what matters to you more than, okay, what do I want to see as an admissions officer? Because I will highly, highly discourage you from doing things in this process just because you think I want to see them. That's a really hard game to play and not one that I recommend. So instead focus on kind of what activities interest and excite you or give you an opportunity to learn a new skill or take care of a family member, right? Or to have that community involvement.